I think that's why the sentence, because she's obviously savvy about the craft, about how to put characters together, about adding the kinds of complications that she's added, and I think that flatness adds to the bleakness of the atmosphere and that kind of thing. Fahrenheit 451 is one of my favorite sci-fi, well, it is my favorite sci-fi novel, and that is classified as literary fiction, yet the style is flat for the same reason. It's a bleak atmosphere, it's just kind of dead and no feeling, because people are not encouraged to have feelings. They're encouraged to follow the script.
And, you know, I think that brings up a couple good points. I agree with Lynette that both that is her style and that it fits. And maybe that's really what makes a good book, right? That this author didn't try to write something that she shouldn't be writing. Like, she wrote something that spoke to her personally and had the right type of writing that would fit the story. You brought up Fahrenheit, which was something my kids brought up. And they were like, well, yeah, that's youth, because they read it as youth. But it is that, we consider that adult fiction, generally. And so that, you know, I think that's just a point that we want to not gloss over. That you have kids who, they may be 12 to 19, but they've been reading adult fiction since they were 14. And you may have other readers who barely make it by 19 into reading what we would consider some fairly simple youth lit. And so, you know, 12 to 19, well, it depends what level of a reader really are you and how mature are you. I remember my brother reading Portnoy's Complaint as a young teenager. People saying to my mother, you're going to let him read Portnoy's? And she said, you know what, if he can read it, he can read it. Whatever he understands, he understands. Let him read. Of course, she was right, I think, anyway. And, you know, my brother's got a big brain, and it worked for him. But I think it is a good point that youth lit, I think, does tend to be simply written when it doesn't necessarily have to be. You know, I think of like Harry Potter with the intricacies, and I think how careful that author was to get his facts straight. I mean, those kids, if you got to book 5 and it didn't make sense from book 1, they knew every detail, and they'll call you on it. And I think that is true, that kids tend to just developmentally, until we get to adults, we tend to look at things in black and white. Is it right or is it wrong? And so that attention to detail, I think, is really key. Yeah, that's a good point.
Henry, our grandson, recommended that I read this. It had been read to him by the librarian, Leanne Hayes, when he was like 4th grade. And he picked up on the political very much. And I was saying, well, what country do you have in your head? And he said North Korea. And I just thought that was so interesting. And I said, Henry, I was thinking about, he's in Russia. And he said, no, I think it's North Korea. I think I vote for North Korea, But I really enjoyed having
well, that a book would stimulate a political conversation with a young teenage boy. I'd say it's done its job. And, again, back to the idea of relationship building, that he and his grandma can have this conversation is just, worth it all.
I enjoy it.
But he'll remember that, Mary Dowd. I mean, our children remember these conversations. I used to talk with my mom about books. I know Joyce has heard me talk about that. And I remember the books we discussed. I remember Cat's Eye was the last book that we shared before she died. It's very powerful to me, and that was 20 years ago. And there's a whole lot of other things I don't remember in the last 20 years. But I can tell you that that's what we read together. So I think it's very powerful. Other thoughts? Have y'all had other experiences sharing the book with children in your lives? No?